first question was about that you said that you started to write stories when you were on a trip when you were 4 or 5 years. But I want to ask you, when do you realize that non-fiction narrative was not only a hobby, but it was your passion?
As soon as I graduated from college and I thought of what I might end up doing with myself, it was the only thing I really was excited about, was the idea of doing narrative nonfiction. And then, of course, there's the question of how do you do that, and how do you make it a profession. But the minute I got an opportunity to write professionally, I knew immediately that that's what I wanted to do.
What was this first opportunity? Maybe in the New Yorker or?
No, before that. After college, I had moved out west, and there was a very small magazine getting started. Brand new, little tiny magazine. I had no experience, so I didn't have a very impressive resume, but I was really passionate about
to write these stories.
Yeah, and I got the job, and the minute I started doing it, I knew it's what I wanted to do.
Okay. Also, in your Twitter account, it says that you are a writer. Oh, I also write. And for example, this passion to tell stories is when you tell that you like to tell someone a story in a dinner, in a classroom. And I want to ask you, what is the meaning of narrative in your life?
It's a good question. I think I see the world as a series of stories, and to me, it's a very basic element of how I experience the world, how I communicate with other people. It's present in every part of my life, really.
And also you have said that storytelling will never disappear because it's the basic of human interaction. And I want to ask you why people are always interested in stories, in hearing stories.
I think I think it's a good thing that that people are curious, that they certainly live in a fairly narrow way, but they have the capacity to be interested in other stories, in other lives, in other worlds. And that's always been true. I don't think we could exist without that curiosity. Even to say to somebody, how was your day?
Yes, it's a story.
It's just the nature of how we live in the world.
Writing, do you write for yourself or do you write for thinking about the public, your public?
You know, it's a combination. I enjoy the experience of learning about what I learn about. I love feeling that I've written. I often write and appreciate what I wrote for my own sake, but I'm always aware of the reader.
Okay, for example, Javier Sergas, he said that he's selfish because basically he writes for himself and not to fix someone's life.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I think I have a little more of an interest in the exchange, even if it's just hypothetical. I get a lot of pleasure imagining the reader.
Okay. For example, if someone have a routinary life, it's more difficult to write fiction if you have a routinary life.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, being a writer is a challenge, whatever you write, and I think it's always been a profession that is done in large part because the people doing it love it and feel they have to do it.
How do you define the chronicle? For example, Juan Villoro says that the chronicle is a mixture of the emotion and the ability to narrate from the novel is a mixture with the news report with the combination of dialogues of the interview, and how do you define the chronicle?
How do I define
For example, Gabriel Garcia Marquez
Right.
says that a chronicle is a true story. And how do you define this chronicle?
Well, I think that nonfiction has to be entirely true. And it can be delivered using all of the, quotations and reporting of facts and description. But it has to always be about trying to be as accurate as possible to the true facts of a situation.
And also to choose what put in the chronicle and what not, because not only single detail is important, maybe.
Yeah.
And for example, in the chronicle you cannot use fiction, it's only reality. And have you ever found this inability to use fiction sets a limit to the chronicle? Like it limits the chronicle?
No, I don't. I feel it's exactly the opposite. You gather the facts, and then the challenge is to how you fit together the facts. If you could just invent extra facts, then you've removed the real challenge, which is to take what is true and weave it together into a story.
Okay. And during a conference, you said that in the past, writers and storytellers could write about a place that nobody else has gone. But now, with this access to information, people, for example, in Google Street View, they can watch it.
Right.
So, what will be the value added nowadays to a writer of chronicles, for example?
I think the value, it's true. In the past, people could simply describe a place because most people had no opportunity to see beyond their very immediate living circumstances. So just reporting the description of places is not enough. But the perspective, the ability to tell a story about a place, to find what's interesting in a place, if you simply detailed every single block of Lima, describing it, that wouldn't be interesting. What the writer brings to it is to pick and choose what's the details that become interesting, and to make it a story.
And maybe also to cause a feeling in the reader and to make the reader learn something new, or when they thought they already knew everything.
And in addition, if they didn't think they might even care, that there are lots of fascinating stories in places that people don't think they have any interest in.
Ability to catch good stories, you develop this ability with time, or is something you're born with?
Both. I think there are natural storytellers, people who are the ones who, in a group, everybody ends up listening to their stories. It's a natural instinct. But I think with experience, with the help of an editor, with just over time perfecting the way you do that, you can get better at it. But I don't know that you could teach someone who has absolutely no sense of a story how to do it.
Also, you said that you have won self-confidence to tell an editor why a story about, for example, a guy of 10 years is important. And what can you tell me about this confidence to tell an editor that a chronicle is important?
Well, I think confidence is a huge part of this profession because in a way you are standing in front of an audience expecting them to pay attention to what you're saying. And it's an even bigger leap if it's a story that doesn't appear to be an important story.
Okay.
And I think that there's so much more. It requires. It's like walking a tightrope, and you just can't look down. You can't ever say to yourself, maybe this isn't interesting to write about a 10-year-old boy. You have to believe that it's a wonderful story. You have to,
care.
yeah, and that's something that you can't teach. I think it grows over time, but I think you have to begin with some amount of this belief that you have a great story to tell and that you can tell it in an interesting way.
And for a good chronicle, you can tell a story about something conventional by compensating it with a great narrative technique, or it is necessary to find something new in everyday things.
Well, I think you need to do both. I think that part of what's important with an ordinary thing is to appreciate that you haven't really ever truly understood it. And in fact, what's funny is that often with those ordinary things, they're more surprising when you stop and really look at them. But I think you have to do both. I think you need to find the surprise in the familiar. But you also need to have the craft to make it compelling.
And also Julio Villanueva-Chan, he said that close up we are all weird. Do you consider that all people are weird or special?
Yeah,
all
I
people
do.
have a story.
Yeah, that anybody examined very closely becomes very individual. So nobody is ordinary in that way.
So you can do a chronicle with anyone, for example.
Yeah, I think so. I think you can, and while we may not choose to do that kind of story over and over again, I think it's fascinating to look at anybody and look really closely at their life, and I have yet to find someone who really just is ordinary. It's a bit of a myth that there is such a thing anyway.
For example, what is the amount of time, the minimum time to write a good chronicle? For example, some people say 3 days minimum, or chronicles take 3 months.
A few of my favorite stories I did with an hour or two.
Which stories?
And they're short. They're short, but I did a story, actually one that wasn't so short, that was a profile of a Hollywood agent, and I only had about an hour with her. And that's not what I normally am comfortable with. Same with another person who I profiled, although I wrote a lot about his business, and I had a lot of time for that. But, normally I feel if someone lets me choose, I feel like I need 3 or 4 or 5 days at a minimum. But
including the process of investigation.
No, I mean that. I feel like you really do need
more time.
But I have definitely done stories on a lot less time than that I am proud of. So I don't think that there's a set amount of time. I really don't. But more time feels better always.
But maybe you write this story in 1 hour or 2 hours because you already investigate or knew that people. Or
sometimes you meet somebody and you just feel instantly like you understand them. I think also there are different stories. There's one story, you can take one story and either do a 1-day version of it or a 6-week version of it. And if you are a good writer, they should both be valuable. They're just different.
You have said that you are one of the worst proposal writers because when you start a chronicle, you don't know where you are going to finish. Maybe you can change the approach, the vision. Tell me about that, please.
You know, I really am a terrible proposal writer because I don't know what to say the book or project is going to be, because that's the whole point. I want to do it so that I'll know. And proposals usually are supposed to give almost a miniature version of what the end product will be. Well, I don't know what the end product is going to be, so I just try to explain why I'm excited and interested in the subject, and hope that that'll be enough.
Okay, so should chronicles change along the way? You can do a good chronicle without changing along the way, or it is necessary to change along the investigation?
Well, I think that if you are writing about something you don't know a lot about, you go into it. It's like, again, you can use the analogy of traveling. If you travel somewhere and you want to, if you were to write up a description of your trip before you went, it wouldn't make sense to me.
Okay.
Instead, you might point out why you wanted to go to the place. But I would hope then you would have adventures and discoveries while you're there. So I try to go in without really any expectation of where I'll end up. And that doesn't always work. In a proposal, that's not what they want.
Yeah. And how much time they give you to write a chronicle? How much time? 1 week? Or?
At the New Yorker? No, more like a month or 6 weeks, in that range, unless it's something that there's a real reason that it has to be done quickly.
Yes. And you have said that you don't like to use the tape recorder for your interviews because you want to have a sense of what you experience. And this is the reason why you don't use tape recorder in the interviews?
I feel like I listen more carefully if I'm taking notes. And even though that may sound counterintuitive, I feel like if I turn on a tape recorder, my mind wanders. I feel like I can kind of not really listen because the tape recorder is taking notes. And then I have to sit down and listen to all the notes, all the tapes. So I would rather take notes because I feel like I'm listening, I'm processing what you're saying, and then I'm writing down things as they come up that seem relevant. So it's part of the editing almost.
Okay, and have you ever forgotten some facts by not recording the declaration? Have you ever forgotten some facts?
Oh yeah. I mean, yes, definitely. And if it's just a piece of factual information, I can go back and find it, usually. What I hate more is if I realize later that somebody was saying something that was actually really interesting, and I didn't, at the time, I didn't think it was interesting.
Okay. Do you agree that there is a development or boom in the chronicle in Latin America?
Well, I don't feel that I can really
talk about.
I'm not. I think that there has been a huge growth of interest in nonfiction writing in the last 10 years or so, which is interesting. I think that there's a real growing appetite for stories that are true and that people can learn from.
Okay, because Leila Guerrero, that is an Argentinian writer, he said that we cannot talk about a development because there are few diaries or places that give money and good time to writers to do good chronicles.
That's true. That's true everywhere, and I think that the U.S. has always been the real home for this kind of writing.
Okay.
And there's always been more support.
The writer of chronicles never lack. What are the abilities of a writer of chronicles?
Curiosity. That's the and enthusiasm. Those are the two things that you can't do without.
More people can read your chronicles because of the internet.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I think it has meant that writers. There's just so much information out there in the world. It's harder for people. It's easier to get published now. It's harder to make a living.
Yeah.